They thought they could trade their $15 million inheritance for a dog spa. They tried to send me to a nursing home, but I was the sole guardian of the Vance fortune. My son and his wife wanted a golden cage. I gave them a public prison. This is the story of how a Palm Beach matriarch, dismissed as frail and old, reclaimed her legacy and executed the quietest, most financially devastating revenge against her own blood. The air in the Palm Beach, Florida mansion was always thick, not just with the humidity that clung to the sea air, but with a silent, suffocating tension. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose 72 years had etched grace and steel into her posture, stood by the massive arched window of the sunroom, looking out at the shimmering expanse of her oceanfront garden. She didn't see the perfectly manicured ficus hedge, or the riot of pink and coral bougainvillea. She only saw a prison, gilded and beautiful, but a prison nonetheless. This house, this architectural masterpiece valued at a staggering $15 million, was the cornerstone of her life, the monument to her late husband, Senator Richard Vance. Richard had built his empire on law, politics, and a keen, almost predatory eye for real estate. He had built this house, the Vance Manor, with Eleanor, choosing every tile, every antique fixture, every inch of marble. It was a space saturated with history. The scent of Richard's pipe smoke in the library, the echo of champagne glasses from the charity galas, the quiet memory of a lifetime of love and compromise. But for the last 3 years, ever since Richard's passing, its soul had been systematically drained away, replaced by the hollow, echoing presence of her son, Arthur, and her daughter-in-law, Serena. Arthur, her only child, had once been a boy of bright laughter and genuine warmth, a son who looked at her with pure, unadulterated admiration. Now, at 45, he looked at her with a calculating impatience that chilled her to the bone. He saw her not as his mother, but as an obstacle, a temporary steward of an inheritance he believed was his birthright. His once promising career as a corporate attorney had stalled. He'd grown complacent, relying entirely on the trust fund Richard had set up, a fund whose principal remained untouchable while Eleanor was alive. But Arthur's transformation was merely a reflection of Serena, his wife. Serena Vance was a masterpiece of polished ambition, 38 years old, with perfect sun-kissed blonde hair and an Instagram aesthetic that screamed effortless wealth. She possessed a talent for making Eleanor feel irrelevant. Serena had convinced Arthur that his talents were being stifled by his mother's old-fashioned sensibilities. Her goal was not just to inherit the estate, but to rebrand it, to tear down the rich, traditional layers of Vance Manor and replace them with the stark, soulless modernism she chronicled on social media. The daily humiliations were subtle, insidious, and constant. They were designed to chip away at Eleanor's dignity, to make her feel like a senile guest in her own home. The staff who had worked for Eleanor for decades, her trusted housekeeper, Maria, and the groundskeeper, Jorge, had been slowly replaced by Serena's choices. Young, indifferent employees who reported directly to her. Eleanor's beautiful old-fashioned limousine, a vintage Rolls-Royce Richard had gifted her, was rarely available, always needed by Serena for some important business meeting. Even the menu had changed. Eleanor, a woman who preferred quiet elegance and classic dishes, was forced to eat the wellness meals Serena decreed. Tasteless, portion-controlled plates while Arthur and Serena enjoyed imported wines and lavish takeout in their wing of the house. The worst offense had occurred just last week. Eleanor had been looking forward to the annual Palm Beach Historical Society Gala, an event she and Richard had practically founded. It was her opportunity to see old friends, to feel like Eleanor Vance again, not Arthur's mother. 2 days before the event, Serena walked into the library where Eleanor was reading and announced with a sickly sweet smile, "Oh, about the gala, Mommy E. We decided to take it, actually. Arthur needs to network. You know, and your friends, bless their hearts. They just aren't the right demographic for the new direction." Eleanor had felt a sharp, cutting pain in her chest, a physical manifestation of the betrayal. She'd managed a quiet, "I see. You've taken my invitations, then." Serena had shrugged, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Technically, they were sent to the house, which is where we live. Don't worry, darling, I left you the program. You can read all about it." That was the moment the last fragile thread of hope Eleanor had clung to snapped. She realized there would be no softening, no return to the loving family dynamic she once knew. Arthur had chosen his wife and his greed over his mother and his honor. They weren't waiting for her to pass away. They were actively trying to push her out, to make her life so miserable and so small that she would either voluntarily leave or suffer a decline that would allow them to take legal control. New battlefront had opened this morning. The will. Richard's will was airtight, a testament to his legal brilliance and his deep, if unspoken, fear that his son lacked a strong financial backbone. The estate, including the $15 million manor, was held in a revocable living trust. Eleanor was the sole surviving trustee and lifetime beneficiary. Arthur could only access the principal upon her death. However, Richard had also included a crucial, subtle clause that Eleanor had only recently rediscovered, a provision allowing her, as the primary beneficiary, to amend the charitable distribution clause once, and only once, after a full 5 years as the sole trustee. The 5-year mark was precisely 6 months away. This clause, tucked away in the dense legalese, was Eleanor's nuclear option. For the last 2 months, Arthur and Serena had been relentlessly pressuring her to sign over power of attorney, claiming it was too much of a burden for her, a frail elderly woman. She had firmly, consistently refused. "Mom, we just want to protect you from the hassle," Arthur had argued last night over a disastrous dinner that Serena had failed to attend. "If something happened, a medical emergency, the paperwork." "I have a long-term care policy, Arthur, and a physician I trust," Eleanor had replied, her voice steady. "And I handle the paperwork for the property just fine. Your father ensured I was capable." He'd slammed his fork down, his face a mask of juvenile fury. "It's not about capability, Mom. It's about trust. You don't trust me, your own son, to manage a few bills." "Trust," Eleanor had repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a sword. "Trust is earned, Arthur. It is not an entitlement written into a will." The morning after that argument, Eleanor awoke with a chilling clarity. She had been fighting a defensive battle, trying to protect herself and her memories within the golden cage. But now she realized she needed to go on the offensive. She needed to move from a position of victimhood to one of strategic power. She was Richard Vance's widow. She was not a woman to be trifled with. She walked from the sunroom, her soft silk slippers silent on the pristine white marble floor, past the 18th century French tapestry that Serena kept trying to replace with a piece of minimalist modern art, and into the study. This was Richard's domain, a room they hadn't yet dared to touch, its mahogany-paneled walls lined with first edition books and the kind of quiet, scholarly dignity Serena despised. She went to the safe hidden behind a bookshelf. The combination, a sequence of their wedding anniversary, Richard's birthday, and the year Arthur was born, was as familiar as her own face. Inside, amongst the stock certificates and insurance policies, was the original trust document and a small, worn black leather journal. This journal was her true treasure. Richard had given it to her on their 25th anniversary, not for love notes, but for what he called her notes on the human condition. It was Eleanor's private record of her life, her observations, her vulnerabilities, and most importantly, her secret knowledge. As she opened the journal, her gaze fell on an entry from 20 years ago, a single, concise paragraph. May 12th. The Boca Raton land deal. Richard closed the deal today. The papers are signed, but the real money, the undisclosed, untaxed proceeds, are now safely transferred. Richard's words, "This is for our security, Ellie, for when the world, or perhaps our son, gets complicated. The account is offshore Caymans." The account number is the last 7 digits of his oldest secure briefcase combo. Only he and I know it. This is our safety net. Eleanor's heart gave a fierce thump. Richard had always been meticulous, but she hadn't fully grasped the significance of that offshore account until now. Richard had a deep-seated distrust of relying solely on the market and the visible assets. He had created a hidden cache, a secret fund, unknown to Arthur, undisclosed in the will, and entirely under Eleanor's control. The amount, Richard had once casually mentioned, was substantial enough to buy and sell Arthur's current lifestyle 10 times over. It was her true independence. She also remembered a quieter detail. Richard had owned a secondary property, a secluded, unassuming saltbox cottage in the Hamptons, bought discreetly under a shell corporation named Ellie's Landing LLC. It was a place for them to escape the Palm Beach spotlight, a place where they could be simply Richard and Eleanor, not the senator and his wife. Arthur and Serena knew of the shell corporation, but believed it was just an empty land holding, a depreciated asset Richard had bought and forgotten. They had never once visited, too busy with the glitz of Palm Beach. Eleanor closed the journal. The fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years began to recede, replaced by a cold, surgical resolve. She was not a frail, elderly woman. She was the sole proprietor of Richard Vance's true legacy, and she had the means and the motive to protect it. Her plan began to formulate, not a plan of petty arguments, but one of structural, strategic warfare. She needed to secure the funds, secure the second property, and then strike where it hurt Arthur and Serena most, their social standing and their financial future. They wanted a show of power. She would give them a performance they would never forget. She reached for the secure phone line Richard had insisted on installing years ago, a line separate from the mansion's main system which Arthur and Serena used. She needed a lawyer, not the one Arthur used, but someone discreet, razor-sharp and loyal only to her. She thought of Marcus Thorne, a former student of Richard's, now a brilliant, notoriously ethical corporate lawyer in New York. Richard had mentored him, and Marcus, Eleanor knew, respected Richard's memory fiercely. Dialing the number, she felt a surge of energy she hadn't experienced since Richard's death. This was more than revenge. It was an act of self-reclamation. Marcus Thorne's office. A professional voice answered. "This is Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice clear and commanding, the voice of the woman who had stood beside a senator for decades. "Tell Marcus I need him in Palm Beach by tomorrow morning. I have an urgent matter of fiduciary betrayal concerning the Vance family trust, and tell him to bring the forms for transferring a foreign-held asset." As she hung up, she walked back to the window. The ocean was a vast blue canvas, indifferent to the petty dramas of the land. She straightened her spine. The golden cage was about to become a trap, and her ungrateful son and his scheming wife were about to realize they had gravely underestimated the woman they thought they had erased. The game was about to change. Marcus Thorne arrived in Palm Beach precisely at 8:00 a.m. the next morning, not in a flashy sports car, but in a discreet dark Lincoln sedan, looking every inch the sharp, no-nonsense New York attorney. At 42, Marcus had the quiet confidence of a man who had seen too much corporate backstabbing to be easily surprised. He had accepted Eleanor's emergency request without question. He owed Richard Vance a great debt for his mentorship, and he held a profound respect for Eleanor's quiet strength. Eleanor met him not in the grand drawing room, where the acoustics and the proximity to Serena were a risk, but in the orchid greenhouse, a structure Richard had built specifically for her rare collection. The air was warm, humid, and scented with exotic vanilla, providing a natural sound barrier and a perfect atmosphere of quiet conspiracy. "Marcus, thank you for coming so quickly," Eleanor said, shaking his hand firmly. There were no tears, no dramatic recounting of grievances, just the cool, objective tone of a woman seeking a legal solution. "Mrs. Vance, when you call with fiduciary betrayal in the same breath as the Vance Trust, I drop everything." Richard's work was meticulous. "What are we dealing with?" Marcus's eyes scanned the room, absorbing the tranquil setting and the fact that Eleanor was entirely alone. Eleanor bypassed the emotional details of Arthur and Serena's cruelty. "My son and his wife are attempting to coerce me into relinquishing control of the trust by way of a fraudulent power of attorney. They believe my age is a vulnerability. They are preparing a case of presumed incompetence." Marcus nodded grimly. "A common tactic. The goal is to liquidate the estate prematurely and bypass the capital gains tax that would hit the trust after your passing. We can file an immediate restraining order to prevent any unauthorized signature attempts and send Arthur and Serena a cease and desist regarding the POA. That will buy us time." "Time is precisely what I need," Eleanor confirmed, leaning closer among the blossoming phalaenopsis. "But I don't just want to fight defensively, Marcus. I want to secure my future and then restructure their future." She then produced the worn black journal. She opened it to the page detailing the Boca Raton land deal and the offshore account. Richard was discreet, Eleanor explained. He had a safety net, a significant private fund in the Cayman Islands transferred 20 years ago. It's entirely separate from the trust, and Arthur has no knowledge of it. This is the key to my independence. Marcus took a moment to review the entry, his expression shifting from lawyerly concern to professional awe. Mrs. Vance, this is brilliant. Richard always anticipated disaster. If the account details are correct, and this money is held outside the trust, it is entirely yours as the surviving joint account holder, assuming the documents reflect that. This fund can finance your entire strategy, keep you independent, and be moved without anyone in the U.S. knowing. I need you to confirm the details and transfer all principal into a new, secure account that only I control. Something stateside but untraceable by Arthur's firm, Eleanor instructed. I want to access that money within the week. Consider it done, Marcus assured her. I have the necessary forms. I can initiate the transfer to a new holding company registered in Delaware, completely anonymous. We will move the money from the Caribbean to the U.S., making it accessible for whatever plan you have in mind. What is the amount we are talking about roughly? Eleanor gave him a quiet smile, enough to make the $15 million house look like pocket change to Arthur. Securing the second sanctuary. Next, Eleanor brought up the Hamptons property, Ellie's Landing. Arthur and Serena believe Ellie's Landing LLC is merely a small, depreciated land asset. They haven't checked on it in years. It is, in fact, a fully furnished, beautiful saltbox cottage. I want to immediately dissolve the LLC and transfer the deed into a new name, perhaps a new trust entirely, with me as the sole, irrevocable beneficiary. I want that property completely insulated from the Vance Trust and any legal claims Arthur might make. A smart move, Marcus commented. We'll set up the Eleanor Vance Private Residence Trust in New York State. Quick, clean, and completely severs any connection to the main Florida Trust. This will be your absolute safety net, your retreat. Eleanor explained that she needed the transfer done with extreme discretion, and she needed a trusted caretaker put in place immediately to prepare the property for a sudden occupancy. I have the perfect person, Marcus. My former housekeeper, Maria. Arthur and Serena dismissed her a year ago to put their own eyes in the house. Maria's loyalty is absolute. She and her husband are currently in Tampa. Can you arrange for them to travel to the Hamptons, all expenses paid from my new account, to prepare the cottage? I want it ready for move-in within 2 weeks. I can manage the legal transfer and the logistics for Maria and her husband, ensuring absolute confidentiality, Marcus confirmed. We will use a prepaid debit card for their initial expenses, keeping the paper trail clean. The final piece of her defensive strategy was to eliminate Arthur's presence in her immediate life. Arthur has an office in the mansion's west wing, which he uses for his projects, mostly stock market gambling and golf score tracking. He's also been charging personal expenses to the house's ledger, believing I don't check. I want him and his office out of the manor within 48 hours. That falls under your authority as the sole surviving trustee and the lifetime beneficiary of the real property, Marcus explained. I will draft a formal, legally ironclad notice to vacate his office space and cease all unauthorized use of trust funds, effective immediately. If he resists, the Palm Beach Sheriff's Department will enforce it. This will send a powerful message. Eleanor stood taller, her blue eyes sharp with resolve. Send the message, Marcus. I want him to know that the little games are over. The true owner of the manor is back in charge. The unveiling of the counterplan. While Marcus began making the calls to the Cayman Bank and preparing the legal paperwork, Eleanor turned her attention to the offensive. She knew that simply moving her money and securing a second home wasn't enough. Arthur and Serena had relied on her emotional attachment to the house and her social status to keep her compliant. To defeat them, she had to strike at their core values, public image, and financial aspiration. Eleanor's quiet revenge began with a simple, calculated move, her social calendar. For months, Serena had controlled her mother-in-law's public life, ensuring Eleanor rarely attended important events, limiting her interaction with influential friends. Eleanor was seen as retired, frail, and sweetly irrelevant. This had allowed Serena to step into the spotlight, positioning herself as the new matriarch of the Vance family, slowly building her own social currency on the foundation of Eleanor's name. Eleanor reached out to Brenda Sterling, her oldest, fiercest friend, a woman with deep roots in Palm Beach society and an appetite for gossip. "Brenda, darling, it's Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with an elegant melancholy she didn't entirely feel. "Eleanor, good heavens, I was worried about you. You've been so quiet. Serena told me you weren't feeling up to the historical gala. I was heartbroken." Brenda's voice was a comforting blend of concern and curiosity. "Oh, darling, that's not quite right. I wanted to go, desperately. But I've been dealing with a few stressful situations here at the manor. Situations that require me to prioritize my well-being and, well, be a bit more cautious with my assets," Eleanor confided, using words that would immediately spark Brenda's imagination. "You know how family can be. They mean well, but sometimes they just don't understand the weight of a multi-generational legacy." She knew those carefully chosen phrases: stressful situations, cautious with assets, weight of a multi-generational legacy, would be interpreted by Brenda as a prelude to a financial or mental breakdown, likely engineered by Arthur and Serena. Brenda would spread the worry like wildfire. Then, Eleanor delivered the main point. "Brenda, I simply must see you. We haven't had a proper lunch since Richard passed. I'm hosting a small intimate luncheon next week. Just the old guard. You, Martha, and Lucille. I want to show you all the changes I'm planning for the manor now that I'm taking a firmer hand in its operations." This was the beginning of her counter-narrative. By inviting her own social circle back into the manor, she was signaling that she was still in control, directly challenging Serena's carefully cultivated image as the de facto lady of the house. Eleanor hung up the phone with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had activated her legal protector, secured her secret escape route, and initiated the social undermining of her adversaries. Arthur and Serena were about to find out that the frail elderly woman they had patronized and plotted against was actually the one holding the keys to their entire future. The silence in the golden cage was about to be broken by the sound of carefully planned retaliation. The day the legal notice arrived at Vance Manor was one of the few days Serena had actually stayed home, not because she cared about her mother-in-law, but because she was overseeing a photo shoot for a new line of organic dog treats she was advising on. The delivery man, a severe-looking courier from a prestigious New York law firm, handed the thick linen-bound envelope directly to Arthur. Arthur, sitting at the mahogany desk in what he arrogantly called his executive office, Eleanor's late husband's former study, signed for the document with a flourish. He assumed it was some routine paperwork related to a minor landholding. When he tore it open, his face, usually a mask of entitled apathy, went slack with shock, then flushed with violent, juvenile rage. The first page was a notice to vacate, issued by Marcus Thorne, Esquirer, and signed by Eleanor Vance, sole surviving trustee and lifetime beneficiary of the Vance Family Trust. You are hereby notified that your occupancy and unauthorized use of the premises known as the West Wing office and storage room within the Vance Manor, a protected asset of the trust, must cease immediately. You have 48 hours to remove all personal property. Furthermore, all access to trust bank accounts and credit lines is hereby revoked, effective immediately, pending a full forensic audit of all expenditures made by you in the last 36 months. Arthur stumbled out of the study, the expensive paper trembling in his hand, and stormed into the sunroom where Serena was directing the photographer. "Serena, look at this. The old woman has gone completely senile," he hissed, his usual condescending tone cracking with genuine alarm. Serena, whose entire focus had been on making sure the lighting hit the perfect angle on a golden retriever, snatched the paper. Her perfectly contoured face went pale as she read the precise clinical language. She wasn't worried about the audit. She was worried about the eviction. The West Wing office was their command center, the place where they stored the expensive wines, the designer clothes she wrote off as business expenses, and more importantly, the discreet files related to their ongoing coercion efforts against Eleanor. Unauthorized use? Serena scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. This is our house. She can't do this. Arthur, call her. Tell her to retract this nonsense immediately, or we'll bring in our lawyer. I tried. Her private line goes straight to voicemail, and the main line is being answered by that horrible robotic service she signed up for. She's stonewalling. Arthur paced the room, running a hand through his thinning hair. And look at the bottom. Marcus Thorne. That's Richard's protege, the guy who practices in New York. This isn't just some local family law attorney. This is serious. Serena's mind worked quickly, brutally. This isn't about the office, Arthur. This is about the audit and the POA. She's fighting back. She knows we're close to pushing her into the assisted living conversation. We need to escalate now. If she thinks she can audit us, we need to counter her with an immediate medical intervention. A medical intervention? Serena, what are you talking about? A competency hearing, darling. If we can prove she's mentally unstable, the notice to vacate is null, and we get immediate control over the trust. She's 72, grieving, and prone to emotional outbursts, as we've documented. Call Dr. Harrison. Tell him she's been exhibiting signs of paranoia and erratic behavior, believing she's being ejected from her own house. This letter is the proof of her delusion, the calm before the storm. While Arthur and Serena scrambled, Eleanor was having a quiet, productive afternoon. Marcus Thorne had confirmed the transfer of the secret Cayman funds was in progress, and the deed transfer for Ellie's landing was legally complete. Eleanor was now independently wealthy, with an untraceable retreat secured. She spent the day making a series of highly specific phone calls to people who had been frozen out of her life by Serena. First, the Palm Beach Historical Society. Eleanor informed the director, Mrs. Eleanor Davies, that due to an unexpected need for security and privacy at Vance Manor, she had been forced to take back the two most valuable 18th-century French armoires Serena had been showcasing in the living room. Serena had them valued, Eleanor, Mrs. Davies gasped. She was talking about donating them to the museum next month for the tax write-off. I am sure her intentions were pure, dear, Eleanor replied, her tone perfectly measured. But they are irreplaceable heirlooms of the Vance family, and given the current volatile emotional climate at the manor, I simply cannot risk their safety. They are being moved to a secure off-site vault. Eleanor knew this move would send a tremor through the Palm Beach social scene. Serena's entire brand was built on her conspicuous generosity and her access to the Vance legacy. With one phone call, Eleanor had cut off Serena's ability to use the Vance assets for her own glory and signaled that the legacy was now under new, more protective management. The second call was to Ms. Beverly Hayes, the social columnist for the Palm Beach Daily News. Eleanor and Beverly had a decades-long relationship built on mutual respect and juicy, yet impeccably sourced information. Beverly, I have an exclusive for you, Eleanor whispered conspiratorially. It concerns the most scandalous divorce in Palm Beach history. Oh, darling, who? Beverly was instantly hooked. It's not a divorce, dear. It's a redeclaration of independence. I'm throwing a small luncheon next week for my closest confidants, Brenda Sterling, Martha, Lucille. I want you to attend, but not as a guest. As an observer, I want you to see the real Eleanor Vance, the one who is taking back control of her life and her home from disappointing elements. Eleanor ensured Beverly understood that this was a developing story about control, legacy, and generational misunderstanding. Words that guaranteed a front-page splash in the society section. The showdown in the study. The 48-hour deadline arrived with the inevitability of a Florida storm. Arthur, ignoring the advice of a frantic Serena, had refused to fully vacate the office. He'd removed a few trinkets but left his computer, his expensive collection of vintage scotch, and a file cabinet containing the sensitive documents. The POA drafts, the nursing home brochures, and the spreadsheets detailing their spending plan for the estate once they took over. He believed he could simply charm or bully Eleanor into submission. At precisely 9:01 a.m. on the deadline day, Eleanor, dressed in a crisp ivory suit that made her look 10 years younger, stood outside the study door. With her was Mr. Davison, a hulking, silent private security contractor Marcus had hired, and Marcus Thorne's paralegal, carrying a clipboard. Arthur was inside, making a furious call to his own lawyer. Serena was deliberately absent, having gone to a yoga class, maintaining the illusion that she was above the pettiness. Eleanor knocked once, sharply. "Arthur, your time is up." Arthur opened the door, his face a thunderous scowl. "Mom, this is insane. I'm still on the phone with my counsel." "You can't legally?" Eleanor didn't flinch. She stepped forward, the paralegal and the security man moving seamlessly behind her. "I can, Arthur. I am the sole trustee. This is my property. You have violated the terms of the trust by charging unauthorized personal expenses and attempting to coerce the trustee. You are now being removed." She pointed to the Scotch cabinet. "Mr. Davison, please box up all personal items that can be removed quickly. The paralegal will inventory the remaining contents." Arthur lost control. He lunged forward, his face inches from his mother's. "You manipulative old shrew. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. After everything I've done for you, you're throwing me out of my office? I'll have you declared incompetent by the end of the week. I've already spoken to Dr. Harrison." Eleanor stood her ground, radiating a cold stillness that stopped him dead. She looked at her son, not with maternal love, but with the measured gaze of a CEO assessing a failed employee. "You have never done anything for me, Arthur. You have only plotted to take from me," she stated, her voice low and cutting. She leaned in, whispering one sentence that hit him like a physical blow. "And if you think a judge will believe your claims of my erratic behavior, after I present them with proof of the $100,000 you lost in that crypto scam last year, which you reimbursed yourself for using the trust's emergency line of credit, you are sorely mistaken." Arthur's face went white. He knew no one, not even Serena, knew about that catastrophic loss. His father had taught Eleanor how to monitor complex financial transactions. How did you know about that?" he stammered, his body visibly deflating. "Your father taught me to always look for the hidden transactions, Arthur. That money is being repaid to the trust with interest. Now get out. Mr. Davison, if he touches anything, call the Palm Beach sheriff. This is now a hostile trespass." Arthur, utterly defeated, backed out of the room, his bravado instantly replaced by panic. As he stumbled away to find Serena, Eleanor walked into the study, now officially her study again. The paralegal quickly secured the crucial file cabinet containing the evidence of Arthur and Serena's schemes. Eleanor sat down behind the massive mahogany desk. She was now armed with absolute financial independence, a secure retreat, the truth about Arthur's gross negligence, and legal possession of the evidence of their conspiracy. The luncheon of reckoning was only days away, and she had every piece in place to turn the tables, not just legally, but socially, on the son and daughter-in-law who thought they could erase her. The atmosphere at Vance Manor on the day of Eleanor's luncheon was a carefully orchestrated symphony of classical elegance and underlying tension. Eleanor had reverted the dining room to its original Richard-era splendor, replacing Serena's stark, white centerpieces with dramatic arrangements of deep red roses and rich emerald foliage. The fine Italian china, which Serena had long relegated to the back of the pantry, gleamed under the crystal chandelier. Arthur and Serena, reeling from the eviction notice and the shocking revelation of Arthur's secret financial loss, were confined to their private suite upstairs. They were furious, but terrified of confronting Eleanor directly, now that she was backed by Marcus Thorne and a private security guard who patrolled the grounds with unnerving diligence. Eleanor's guests arrived precisely at 1 p.m. Brenda Sterling, Martha Davies, and Lucille Montgomery. They were the undisputed pillars of Palm Beach society, women whose approval could make or break a career, and whose gossip was more potent than any newspaper column. And then there was Beverly Hayes, the Palm Beach Daily News social columnist, who was discreetly seated in the sunroom, ostensibly waiting for Eleanor for a private chat, but with a perfect, unobstructed view of the dining room. As the women settled at the table, the small talk was immediately strained. The absence of Serena, the usual hostess of recent years, was glaring. "Eleanor, darling, it's just lovely to see you hosting again," Brenda purred, her eyes scanning the room for changes. We heard you were taking some time for yourself." Thank you, Brenda. And yes, I have been taking some time for myself, Eleanor replied, her voice soft but carrying. Time to reassess priorities and, more importantly, time to conduct a thorough reorganization of the entire estate. Martha, always direct, leaned forward. We've been worried, Eleanor. Serena has been telling everyone you're under too much stress, that perhaps the manor is too much for you to manage alone. Eleanor smiled sweetly, lifting her hand to show off the magnificent Vance diamond ring Richard had given her, a piece she had deliberately stopped wearing for the past 2 years, fearing Serena would demand to borrow it. Nonsense, Martha. The manor is where my heart is. It's my legacy. But it has become quite clear that the property was being mismanaged by certain parties who had access to its operations, Eleanor announced, pausing just long enough for the gravity of the statement to sink in. She deliberately did not look toward the sunroom, but she knew Beverly Hayes was hanging on every word. The meticulously trained server began distributing a clear consommé. Eleanor looked directly at Lucille. Lucille, I know you understand the importance of fiduciary integrity. When people assume they can use a trust's resources as their personal piggy bank, things go astray. It requires a firm hand to reel it all back in. Eleanor then steered the conversation to her son, but with an air of profound sadness, not accusation. You know how Arthur is. He has such a generous yet naive spirit. He's always getting involved in these complicated, risky business ventures, and I've found that sometimes you have to be the stern parent, even when your son is 45, and protect him from his own poor judgment. This carefully crafted narrative accomplished 2 things. It confirmed Arthur was the source of the mismanagement and the financial issues, and it framed Eleanor not as a senile victim, but as the responsible protector of the Vance legacy, making difficult, necessary decisions to save her son from himself. The unspoken truth of the mansion. Midway through the main course, a succulent Florida grouper, Eleanor launched the second phase of her public offensive. I must apologize for not being more available lately. As you know, I adore hosting, but the environment here had become challenging. Serena, bless her heart, had begun to confuse her role with her entitlement. She motioned to an empty space on the wall where, just weeks ago, a massive abstract canvas Serena had bought was hanging. She had replaced Richard's original 19th century oil painting of the Intracoastal Waterway with that piece she insisted was statement art. She was using the manor as a backdrop for her social media ventures, and treating the Vance legacy as her personal brand. A disaster, Brenda whispered dramatically. Eleanor lowered her voice, injecting a deep well of maternal sadness. The truth is, my son and his wife have been under enormous financial pressure. Arthur's investments haven't panned out, and they believe the solution is to liquidate the manor and put me somewhere. Well, somewhere I would be less trouble. She let the statement hang, powerful and shocking. These women understood that less trouble meant nursing home. I overheard a conversation, ladies, Eleanor continued, leaning in conspiratorially. They were planning to use the proceeds from the manor's sale to finance some ridiculous business idea of Serena's, something about luxury dog spas in Miami. Imagine selling Richard's house, our home, the most beautiful manor in Palm Beach, to pay for dog spas. The reaction was immediate and visceral. The thought of the Vance Manor being sold to fund a frivolous new money business was an affront to their deeply entrenched sense of class and history. The audacity, Lucille declared, slamming her napkin down. That woman has no respect for tradition. This was the core of Eleanor's public revenge. She exposed the greed and vulgarity of Arthur and Serena's plan, turning them from stylish young inheritors into grasping, opportunistic villains who valued dog treats over heritage. The grand announcement, as the dessert, a light, artisanal lemon tart, was served. Eleanor prepared for the final flourish of the afternoon. She raised her crystal champagne flute, catching the light and the attention of every woman at the table. My dears, I have an announcement. You all know that I have been considering making some arrangements for the manor's future. Arthur and Serena have made it clear they believe they should take over, but I simply cannot in good conscience hand over my husband's legacy to people who would sell it for a dog spa. Eleanor paused, her eyes sparkling with determination. Therefore, I have made a decision that protects the manor, protects my future, and ensures Richard's legacy is honored. Effective immediately, I am entering into a conditional, long-term lease agreement with the Palm Beach Historical Society to make the entire West Wing and the formal gardens of Vance Manor accessible to the public for curated tours and historical events. The announcement was met with a chorus of gasps and excited murmurs. To the Historical Society, this was a triumph. To Serena, it was war. This means that the manor will remain intact, cherished, and preserved for the community, exactly as Richard wished. Eleanor concluded, sipping her champagne. It also means, regrettably, that the remaining private living quarters here will become too small for a family of 3, given the sudden influx of guests and staff necessary to manage public access. She set the flute down. So, for the first time since my husband and I bought this property 40 years ago, I will be taking a much-needed, lengthy vacation. I am going to retire quietly to my husband's small private property up in the Hamptons, a lovely, secluded spot called Ellie's Landing. I plan to spend the next few years writing my memoir. The news of her move was almost overshadowed by the news of the Historical Society's access. Eleanor's move to the Hamptons was presented not as an ejection, but as a triumphant, dignified retirement financed by her own undisclosed means. Later that afternoon, after her guests had departed, Eleanor walked into the sunroom. Beverly Hayes closed her notebook, her eyes shining with the anticipation of a truly sensational scoop. Eleanor, that was incredible. The Historical Society? The Hamptons? Beverly, I simply refuse to be made irrelevant. A woman's legacy is not just the assets she leaves behind, but the dignity with which she lives her final years, Eleanor stated with a theatrical sigh. I will be moving within the week, and Arthur and Serena will have full access to the manor. As my property managers, of course. They will be entirely responsible for overseeing the Historical Society's constant stream of public tours and events. She knew Arthur and Serena, who lived for privacy and resented any form of work, would be horrified. They had wanted the house as a private fortress. Eleanor was turning it into a very public museum, forcing them into the humiliating, unpaid roles of caretakers of their mother's legacy. As Beverly scribbled furiously, Eleanor had one final detail. She pointed to a beautiful handwritten sign the paralegal had discreetly placed on the door to the West Wing, right outside Arthur and Serena's suite. The sign read, Historical Society Staff Entrance. Please do not disturb the exhibits. The power had completely shifted. Eleanor had secured her escape, exposed their greed, and turned their prized possession into their new, highly visible, and very public cage. The next phase of her plan would be the permanent severing of their future. The publication of Beverly Hayes' column in the Palm Beach Daily News hit Arthur and Serena like a Category 5 hurricane. The headline blared, Vance matriarch retires to Hamptons, turns $15 million manor into public heritage site after mismanagement issues. The article meticulously detailed Eleanor's dignified return to power, referencing her decision to secure the Vance legacy from elements who prioritized frivolous commerce over tradition, and confirming the immediate transfer of the manor's West Wing to the Palm Beach Historical Society. It subtly, yet unmistakably, painted Arthur and Serena as the grasping, irresponsible parties who had tried to exploit an emotionally vulnerable elderly woman. Arthur and Serena were humiliated. Their phones exploded with calls, not from concerned friends, but from shocked and critical associates. Serena's budding clientele for her luxury pet brand consulting evaporated overnight. Her carefully curated image of sophisticated, effortless wealth was shattered, replaced by the reality of her new, humiliating role. Unpaid caretakers of her mother-in-law's public museum. The inevitable custodial nightmare. The very next morning, the Historical Society arrived. They brought security guards, docents, velvet ropes, and an enormous detailed schedule of tours beginning that week. The entire manor, once their private playground, was now buzzing with activity, noise, and worst of all for Serena, Serena, who had always reveled in the seclusion of the mansion, found her yoga retreat, her morning mimosa on the terrace, and her afternoon sunbathing completely invaded. She couldn't escape the presence of the public. The sound of visitors murmuring and a docent's voice lecturing on 19th century architecture permeated the entire house. The humiliation peaked when the Historical Society staff, following Eleanor's instructions, replaced the gold nameplate on the main door of Arthur and Serena's private suite with a laminated sign that read, "Private Residence, Property Management Suite." They were no longer the prestigious owners. They were the live-in staff. "I can't live like this!" Serena shrieked at Arthur after a group of elderly tourists accidentally wandered past their living room window, mistaking their expensive Italian leather sofa for an exhibit. "We have to stop her. We have to get a lawyer to overturn this Historical Society agreement," Arthur yelled back, his usual soft voice harsh with panic. "We tried. I called our lawyer. He said the trust gave her full authority as the lifetime beneficiary and trustee to enter into a long-term commercial lease." "And the audit, Arthur?" "Your lawyer said the crypto loss and the unauthorized charges make us look like the fiduciaries who abused the trust. We can't fight the competency hearing now. We'll lose everything." Serena paced, her desperation raw and unmasked. They were trapped. If they left the manor, they would lose access to their suite and face immediate financial disaster, as they were still paying expenses, which Eleanor had cleverly redirected to them. If they stayed, they were forced into public servitude for the woman they had tried to institutionalize. The quiet exit. Meanwhile, Eleanor was making her own meticulously planned exit. She had already secured the Ellie's landing deed and the vast, untraceable funds. On the day of her departure, she instructed her new driver, a retired Special Forces veteran hired by Marcus, to pull the car around to the front door at exactly 11 a.m., the precise moment the largest Historical Society tour group of the day was scheduled to arrive. Eleanor emerged, dressed in a chic travel-ready ensemble, carrying only a small overnight bag and the precious black journal. She smiled radiantly at the astonished crowd of tourists gathering for the first public tour. "Welcome, everyone. Please, enjoy the beauty of Vance Manor," she called out, pausing for dramatic effect as flashbulbs from the few remaining reporters popped. "I'm leaving the manor in the capable hands of my son Arthur and his wife Serena, who will be managing the public access. They are so dedicated to the Vance legacy. I'm off to the quiet life in the Hamptons. Goodbye, everyone." With one final triumphant wave, she slipped into the sedan. The whole spectacle lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was enough to solidify the public image. Dignified matriarch triumphs over ungrateful, hard-working son and wife. As the car pulled away, Eleanor looked back at the imposing facade of Vance Manor. She saw Arthur's furious, defeated face staring down at her from their third-story window. It wasn't the cathartic triumph she had expected. It was the quiet, cold satisfaction of a debt repaid. The final legal coup de grace. Eleanor spent the next few days in a luxury New York hotel suite, reviewing the final piece of Marcus Thorne's strategy, the amendment to the trust's charitable distribution clause. As she sat with Marcus, the forms laid out on the table, Eleanor confirmed the transfer of the Cayman funds had been successful. She now controlled a fortune that secured her future 3 times over. She no longer needed the Vance Manor or the trust principal. "The 5-year mark allowing you to amend the charitable clause is today, Mrs. Vance," Marcus stated, handing her the pen. "Once this is signed, notarized, and filed, Arthur will be officially removed as the primary residual beneficiary." Eleanor looked at the final paragraph that outlined the new distribution plan. Before this amendment, the trust stipulated that upon Eleanor's death, the manor and the remaining liquid assets would go directly to Arthur. If he predeceased her, it would go to his children, if any, or to a minor charity. The new amended clause, which Eleanor had painstakingly worked out with Marcus, was brutal in its finality. It stipulated that upon Eleanor's passing, Vance Manor would immediately be transferred in full to the Palm Beach Historical Society, ensuring its permanent preservation and public use. 95% of the remaining liquid principal of the trust would be irrevocably directed to the Richard Vance Scholarship Fund for Legal Ethics, a new foundation dedicated to training young, ethical lawyers. The final 5% of the principal would be placed in a separate, restrictive trust, the Arthur Vance Basic Needs Stipend. This small, minimal fund would only disburse a meager, fixed monthly allowance, barely enough to cover a small apartment rental and basic utilities, the fund's primary condition. It would cease immediately if Arthur or Serena publicly contested Eleanor's will or the trust's terms. This final clause was Eleanor's ultimate revenge: financial castration and perpetual dependency. Arthur would not be destitute, but he would be perpetually poor, unable to pursue any kind of significant business venture, and forever dependent on a tiny handout. The clause ensured he would spend the rest of his life wondering what he could have had, if only he hadn't betrayed his mother. Eleanor picked up the pen, her hand steady and resolute. She signed the document with a flourish, witnessed by the notary Marcus had brought. "File it immediately, Marcus," she commanded. "And send Arthur a brief final letter informing him of the amendment, effective today. No details, just the statement that the financial landscape of the trust has been permanently and irrevocably altered to reflect my enduring values and long-term assessment of fiduciary risk." The final paperwork was done. Eleanor had not just taken her money. She had dismantled Arthur and Serena's entire future, leaving them trapped in a house they couldn't control, with a reputation they couldn't repair, and with the painful knowledge that the life they had coveted was now earmarked for historical tours and ethical law students. The golden cage was officially hers no more. It was their prison. 6 months after Eleanor's quiet escape, Ellie's landing in the Hamptons was a true sanctuary. The Saltbox Cottage, nestled among the tall dune grasses and overlooking the vast, churning Atlantic, was everything Vance Manor had ceased to be: cozy, authentic, and utterly private. Eleanor spent her days walking the beach, tending to a small rose garden, and most importantly, writing. Her memoir, titled The Golden Cage and the Key, was not a tale of revenge, but a nuanced account of a woman's journey from supportive wife and doting mother to the reluctant custodian of her own destiny. She wrote about Richard's wisdom, the quiet betrayals she endured, and the cold, rational steps she took to reclaim her dignity. It was a story of self-preservation, financed by the undisclosed, offshore wealth that Arthur and Serena never knew existed. Eleanor was surrounded by quiet loyalty. Maria, her former housekeeper, now her trusted house manager, ensured her life ran with serene efficiency. Marcus Thorne managed her finances, investing the Cayman funds wisely and providing updates on the situation in Palm Beach. Updates Eleanor rarely asked for, but always listened to. The legal letter Marcus sent, confirming the irrevocable amendment to the Vance family trust, had been the death knell for Arthur and Serena's ambitions. They understood the gravity of the change. Upon Eleanor's passing, there would be no multi-million-dollar manor, no liquid fortune, and no luxurious retirement. Their entire future had been reduced to a monthly basic needs stipend, a pittance that served as a constant, humiliating reminder of their mother's final judgment. Vance Manor, a museum of misery. Life for Arthur and Serena at Vance Manor had become an agonizing, perpetual performance. The manor was no longer a home. It was a ticking time bomb of public access. The Palm Beach Historical Society tours were a resounding success. Busloads of tourists, society mavens, and history enthusiasts streamed through the West Wing daily. Arthur and Serena were forced to live in the compressed space of the East Wing, constantly listening to the muffled sounds of strangers admiring the architecture that should have been theirs. Their humiliation was compounded by their unpaid duties. The lease agreement stipulated that the property managers, Arthur and Serena, were responsible for the manor's daily upkeep, grounds maintenance, and addressing all historical society concerns. Serena, who had dreamed of hosting private, glamorous parties, was now fielding complaints about clogged toilets and ensuring the public bathrooms were adequately stocked. Tasks she was wholly unprepared for and deeply resented. Arthur, stripped of his easy money and his grand office, found his attempts to revive his career futile. His reputation was ruined, He was widely known in Palm Beach circles as the feckless son who lost his inheritance because he was too greedy. Any attempt to start a new business was blocked by his lack of collateral and the persistent public perception of his poor financial judgment, thanks to Eleanor's quiet disclosures. He and Serena began to fight constantly, the stress turning their gilded life into an acrimonious trap. They had nowhere to go. They couldn't sell the house, and they certainly couldn't afford to rent an apartment that matched their extravagant lifestyle. They were anchored by the humiliating reality that they were dependent on the very structure they were forced to maintain for the public. The finality of the will. 2 years passed. The constant strain finally broke Arthur and Serena. They left Vance Manor abruptly, abandoning their remaining possessions and the crippling responsibility of the management contract. They relocated to a small, unremarkable apartment in suburban Orlando, far from the critical eyes of Palm Beach society, their wealth entirely gone. Their social standing reduced to zero. Eleanor, reading the brief report Marcus sent detailing their retreat, felt no joy, only a profound, distant sadness for the son she had lost long before. Her revenge was not born of malice, but of the necessity to protect her legacy and her own right to a peaceful old age. 3 years after she signed the amendment, Eleanor's book, The Golden Cage and the Key, was published. It was a national bestseller, resonating with women who had been underestimated, marginalized, or taken for granted. Eleanor donated all the book's proceeds to the Richard Vance Scholarship Fund, the same organization that would eventually inherit the vast majority of the trust's principal. Eleanor Vance lived out her days peacefully at Ellie's Landing. She was revered, independent, and finally, truly free. When she passed away peacefully at the age of 80, the terms of the amendment were executed immediately. Vance Manor was permanently transferred to the Historical Society. The liquid assets poured into the scholarship fund, establishing a massive endowment that would help thousands of students pursue ethical law careers, a far more noble and lasting legacy than a luxury dog spa. Arthur Vance, who by then had been working a low-paying job in middle management, received the first of his meager basic needs stipend checks. It was enough to cover half his rent, a pathetic fraction of the fortune he had squandered and then tried to steal. He looked at the check, signed by the Eleanor Vance Private Residence Trust, and the accompanying letter, which stated the terms of its termination should he ever challenge the will. He understood the message perfectly. His mother had paid him to stay silent and remain poor. She had secured her dignity, and in doing so, had delivered the ultimate, quiet revenge, a lifetime of regret, dependency, and the inescapable echo of the $15 million life he had foolishly thrown away.